Tornado Trouble by Stephen Lake. It was a warm, cloudy afternoon as a young man named Joel pedaled his bicycle through the fresh, clean air of summertime. As he rode along, he was surprised that the streets around him were empty, and nobody was anywhere to be found. From what he could tell, they'd all chosen to hide indoors, within the cool, refreshing grip of their air conditioners, to soak up the cool, artificially chilled air that they produced. This puzzled him, as he couldn't understand why none of them would want to be outside on such a wonderful summer day, instead of cooped up within the four walls of their domiciles. Deciding not to dwell on this, he continued onward down the road he was on, pushing himself forward at a comfortable, casual pace for several more miles until the wind around him suddenly picked up and began to impede his progress. Despite this, he pressed forward, pushing the pedals up and down with great vigor as he continued to drive forward. However, despite his seemingly endless bounty of youthful strength, he was eventually forced to pull off the road and stop in front of an old workshop to rest. As he stood there catching his breath, he took a few moments to study the building. It wasn't an especially remarkable one, and looked somewhat derelict in its upkeep. But that didn't matter to him. He wasn't planning to stay there for more than the few minutes he needed to recover. However, as he continued to stand there, a peculiar odor wafted through the air and caught his attention. He perked up upon sensing this. It was the undeniable smell of incoming rain. A moment later, a barely audible rumble of thunder echoed in the distance. Curious to what was coming, Joel turned himself and looked upward. His eyes expertly scanned the skies around him until he spotted a tall, menacing thunderstorm that was rapidly approaching. Its upper reaches were made of fluffy, billowing clouds accented by a brilliant, silvery white top and puffy, grayish edges. These, in turn, were accented by thin, wispy bands of stringer clouds that marched slowly around its vast and imposing perimeter. Beneath this hung a thick, foreboding darkness, the shade of midnight, that was punctuated by ominous, yellowish flickers of light that danced playfully within the shadows of the storm. Wow, where'd that come from, he thought. Just then the wind around him increased sharply, tossing the trees in the area into great flowing waves of green. Thunder again echoed from the sky, but much closer this time, shaking the air as it did like the beatings of a great kettle drum. Joel frowned at this. Well, it looks like I won't be going anywhere for a while. At least, not until that storm passes, he thought. He then looked around the area for a suitable place to shelter, and soon realized that the place he was at would likely be his best option. So he turned his bike and pushed it into the building. Upon entering, he was surprised to find that the front office was completely empty. But it didn't remain that way for long, as the service bell over the door immediately summoned someone from the back. "May I help you?" asked a man as he appeared out of a nearby doorway. "There's a thunderstorm coming. Can I shelter here until it passes?" asked Joel. The man shrugged. "Sure, I don't see why not. Make yourself comfortable," he said, gesturing to a nearby chair. Just then, a loud shouting match erupted from the back room. But this didn't sound like men who were fighting, so much as a heated discussion. Joel and the man both looked briefly in the direction of the ruckus, and then back at each other. "So what's going on back there?" asked Joel. The man gestured dismissively. "Oh, don't worry about them. They're just watching a race down in Indy," he replied. Joel screwed up his face in an expression of confusion at this. "Wow, they're getting that enthusiastic about a race." The man chuckled. "Oh, this is nothing. You should see it when they get boozed up," he replied. Thunder rattled the windows of the building like crystalline church bells as Joel cocked an eyebrow in consternation. "Okay, but I'll take your word for it," he said in muted disbelief. The man chuckled at this, and then slipped into the back to join the others. Just then another peal of thunder split the air powerfully, as rain began falling outside in thick, heavy sheets. It wasn't long after this that the wind began to drive the rain into horizontal bands of soft, bluish white. As this unfolded, Joel parked his bike in a corner of the room, and then turned to watch the storm with great interest as it raged violently outside. To his surprise, however, even though the storm was already wild and violent beyond most that he had seen of late, this one appeared to be growing stronger and stronger, as it blew with such force that it made even the biggest trees around them bend like reeds in the wind. Just then, tornado sirens began to blare. Uh-oh, that's not good, thought Joel. A moment later, 4 men came storming out of the back to see what all the noise and fuss was about. As they did, one of them noticed Joel standing on the other side of the counter with his bike. "Hey, what are you doing here?" he said gruffly. "Leave him alone, Larry. He's just waiting out the storm," said the man from earlier. "Is he buying anything?" asked the first man, the owner of the business. The second man punched him in the shoulder. "Dude, he just wants some shelter. So stop worrying about whether he's going to buy something or not. Hey, it's what I'm in business for. If they've got money, then I want it. It's as simple as that." A powerful flash of lightning suddenly filled the room, followed immediately by a sharp, reverberating boom that set the building vibrating. "Wow, that storm is really raging," said another of the men. The 5 of them then listened as the wind momentarily drowned out the tornado sirens. But they soon fought back and continued blaring their warnings. Realizing the danger they were in, Joel looked at the 4 men anxiously. "Do you guys have a basement or tornado shelter?" he asked. "What for?" asked the owner gruffly. "There's a tornado coming, so we need to take cover." The owner looked at Joel as though he were crazy. "What tornado?" he asked snidely. Joel narrowed his eyes in consternation at this, and then motioned towards the blaring sirens. "The same tornado that those sirens are warning us about. They wouldn't be sounding like this if there wasn't one," he protested. 3 of the 4 men looked at each other briefly, and then let out raunchy, hysterical laughs. "You're funny, kid. There ain't no tornado in this world crazy enough to touch my shop. If one did, I'd bust his chops," said the owner. He then walked past Joel, out into the raging winds, and began shaking his fist at the storm. "Come on, you coward. Is that all you got? Huh? Come on, baby. You can't down old Donny boy. I'm invincible," he shouted. Just then, to everyone's surprise, the wind suddenly slackened as the rain quickly tapered off to nothing. The owner then began to laugh the storm to scorn. I knew you didn't have it in you. Look, boys, I scared away the storm," he bellowed. However, this mysterious tapering off did nothing to calm Joel. If anything, it made him even more nervous. He'd seen this kind of thing plenty of times before, and it rarely ended well. The tornado sirens continued to blare their warnings despite the storm seeming to peter out and die in front of them. Wanting to see for himself what their current situation was, he hurried out the door, past the owner, and into the street. When he eventually looked up, he noticed that the sky above him was still black, and it was moving. In fact, it was moving in ways that it shouldn't. He quietly stared at the sky for several moments longer as he searched anxiously for signs of the tornado. Just then a house that was a few blocks away from him disintegrated, sending debris spiraling into the air. Upon seeing this, cold terror poured through Joel's body like a flood, making his knees tremble with fright. He then turned to the owner and cried, "If there's no tornado, then what's that?" The owner laughed him to scorn. "That ain't no tornado, boy. You're just being a sissy," he replied mockingly. Joel again pointed insistently toward the sky and the growing cloud of debris that was forming not far from them. "But it's right there. Can't you see it?" he shouted. However, the owner only continued to laugh. "Come on, boys, Mr. Chicken Little here seems to think that we're all in danger. Bah humbug. Let's all go back and watch the race," he replied mockingly. He and the other 3 men then turned and made their way into the back office. But Joel wasn't about to stand idly by and die because they all wanted to be fools. He then ran over to the office door and pounded on it frantically. "Do you have a basement?" he asked. "We ain't got no basement, boy." "Now go away," came a voice from inside. "No basement," said Joel anxiously. He then frantically looked around the place in search of anything that might provide him with some small degree of shelter. Surprisingly, he found nothing. He rushed out into the workshop and spotted a sturdy metal railing that sat on one side of the shop. He then listened in fear as the winds outside the building began to pick up again, and a loud crescendoing roar, like an approaching freight train, quickly filled the air. At this rate, it wouldn't be long before the tornado was upon him. So he looked around for anything he could use to anchor himself. But there was nothing. In fact, there wasn't much of anything in the shop at all. He wasn't sure what kind of business they ran, but it couldn't be anything too involved if they had very little in the building. Just then debris began to fly past the doorway. The tornado had arrived. Joel paused when he saw this and tried to calm himself. Panic was not his friend right now. He then remembered his bike. Around the upper frame bar was a chain that he used to lock it up. It wasn't much, but it would hopefully keep him from being blown away when the full force of the tornado hit. He only hoped that the building didn't come down on top of him or turn into 1,000 deadly missiles, because if it did, he wouldn't survive. He quickly raced over, grabbed his bike chain, and secured himself to the railing with it. Moments later, the man that he'd met when he first arrived stepped out of the office and looked at him. He studied the young man curiously for several moments, and then looked out the front door just as a car and part of a roof tumbled wildly down the street. If he wasn't convinced before that they were in trouble, he was now. Seeing this, he quickly turned and raced into the office, where he shouted, "Guys, there really is a tornado coming. We need to take shelter now." Shut up. I'm trying to watch the race," cried the owner. Another of the men, who were sitting next to him, smirked mockingly, and then reached over and tossed him a length of rope. "If you're so worried that you're going to be blown away like Dorothy, then why don't you take this and go tie yourself down like a good little Toto?" he said condescendingly. The man looked at the rope in his hands, then the front door, and finally over at Joel as the roof began to groan under the strain of the wind. Not wasting a moment longer, he raced over and immediately got down next to Joel. He then tied the rope around his body and fastened it securely to the railing. As Joel sat there, praying frantically for protection, the man who had joined him leaned over and put his arm around him. Joel looked up at him curiously. "What are you praying for?" asked the man. "That we survive this," replied Joel. The building creaked and groaned even more under the powerful winds outside. The man looked up anxiously at the slowly failing roof, and then back at Joel. "Are we going to die?" he asked nervously. "If God wants us to, we will. But if not, then we'll come through this alive," replied Joel. The man nodded anxiously and said, "Pray for me, I'm scared." Just then another powerful creak and a snap signaled that the building was ready to come apart at any moment. Realizing that they were out of time, Joel pulled himself into the fetal position, covered his head, and began to pray earnestly for both their safeties. A moment later, a great tearing sound echoed through the building as the roof violently ripped free and exploded into the air, followed shortly by the walls and the remainder of the building. The powerful, tornadic winds soon sucked everything into the air, including the 3 men who were in the office, and scattered them across the countryside. Joel and the man next to him prayed powerfully as the winds beat viciously against their bodies. Suddenly, pieces of debris and parts of the building began to rain down around them with great, heavy thuds. They both grit their teeth and winced in anticipation, as they expected to be hammered by it at any moment. But, to their combined relief and surprise, nothing hit them. In fact, it was at that moment that they both noticed an unusual and rather peculiar change in the wind. Where once it had been raw, violent, and destructive, it had now become soft and cool, and only slightly ruffled their clothing. It wasn't long before everything grew completely silent. Curious to what was happening, Joel slowly raised his head and opened his eyes as he scanned the area around them curiously. To his surprise, he was both alive and unharmed. Seeing that the tornado had finally passed, Joel carefully unhooked himself from a railing and then helped the man next to him untie his rope. The 2 of them then stood up and surveyed the area around them in awe and wonder. To their shock and surprise, everything, as far as they could see, had been wiped away, save only for the metal railing that they'd attached themselves to. Even the trees were gone, replaced by little more than empty, muddy holes. Joel marveled at this, and felt even more thankful now that they were both still alive. He then turned and studied the man who had weathered the storm with him. He appeared shaken by everything he'd just experienced, but also very thankful to be alive. "You okay?" asked Joel. The man nodded anxiously. "I am. But how did we survive? Joel grinned. God protected us. Tears soon began to flow down the man's face. He then looked up at the sky and said, "Thank you, God, for protecting me." Joel smiled. Amen. He then heard a little rattle to his left and turned to see what it was. To his surprise, not but a mere 2 feet away, lay his bike, completely intact and surprisingly immaculate. "Wow, check that out," said Joel as he pointed at his bike. The man turned to see what he was gesturing towards, and then laughed. "Well, what you know, God even protects bikes," he exclaimed. Joel laughed at this in surprised joy. "I guess he does." The man again laughed briefly before letting out a sad, frustrated sigh. "Yeah, but my house is gone," he said mournfully. Joel studied the man curiously. "Where was it at?" he asked. The man pointed towards an empty slab just down the street. Joel grimaced. "Ouch. Sorry about your loss," he replied. The man sniffled and then chuckled slightly. "Would you believe I just finished paying it off?" Joel laughed. "Actually, I can." "So, do you have anywhere to go?" he asked. To his dismay, the man shook his head. "That house and my car was all I had. If you need a place to stay, my mom and I can help you find something." The man looked at Joel in surprise. "You'd do that for me?" he asked. Joel shrugged. "Sure. I can't just leave you without a place to stay." Joel then walked over and picked up his bike. The man again studied the nearly spotless bike and marveled at this. After a bit, he looked at Joel and smiled. "I really appreciate you helping me out like this," he said sheepishly. It's no big deal. It's what Christians do." "You're a Christian?" said the man in surprise. Joel nodded. "Yeah, and I have been since I was a little child." The man smiled at this. "Then would you please introduce me to your God? If he's powerful enough to protect us from a storm like that, and kind enough to give me a place to stay, then he's someone I'd like to know." Joel smiled. "I'd be glad to." The end.